Back in the 1800s, no one in Washington, D.C. cared whether you attended Sunday services, even if it was on the floor of Congress. One America's John Hines has more from Washington.
The separation of church and state is part of the foundation of our American democracy. But James Hudson, scholar and author of Religion and the Founding of the American Republic, says presidents and members of Congress routinely attended church services in many federal buildings, including in Congress, up through the late 1800s.
Religious services were held in the House chamber, and insofar as we know, they were held from the moment the Congress began to occupy the House, as they didn't think there was any conflict.
In fact, Hudson says one of our presidents famous for writing about the separation of church and state attended weekly church services held on the floor of Congress.
Thomas Jefferson wrote his famous letter to the Danbury Baptist Society on January 1, 1802, in which he talked about in the draft, it says an eternal wall of separation between church and state. 2 days later, he attended a church service in Congress and continued to attend church services in Congress until his administration was over.
The notion of the separation of church and state has evolved since Jefferson's day, says former pastor and Georgia Republican Congressman Doug Collins.
The separation of church and state has always been there, but in the past, I would say 50 to 75, even longer years, we've turned the equation. What's happened in the last few years, and I think it's reflective of anything that would come in contact with a federal building or anything else, is that now we believe that it's a different role, that the government is to separate itself completely in the sense that it sort of polices that. And I think that's just a different perspective. The government was supposed to stay out of it, not to be sort of policing which way these situations go.
As late as the 1880s, no one in Washington objected to Sunday services in the Supreme Court, War Department, Treasury Building, or any other federal building. Even Representative Collins, still a pastor in the Air Force Reserve, doesn't see those days coming back, which makes one wonder, perhaps, if he were alive today, what would Thomas Jefferson do? And would the mainstream media approve? John Hines, One America News, Washington.